But I guess one of the beauties about our relationship, Al, and what we're trying to do for people here is really be authentic and vulnerable and all those things. So if I think about my entire lifetime and the greatest hardship, suffering, if you will, etc., would be seeing my marriage fail after 33 years. And it's I'm four plus years out, and so those perspectives of what have I learned, what have I grown from, how can I be, I guess, an example to others in the world about, I guess, two things. Maybe one would be, how do you survive that on the other end and not have such self-deprecation and think you're a failure at life and you failed your family and you failed your former spouse? Why not go to the garage with the garden hose? And that is that's real for a lot of people, not just me. Hi, Al. Good to be with you again on another episode of Fourth Level Conversations. How are you?
I'm good, Stace. It is wonderful to be with you. I'm sitting here in a gray, rainy day in Florida. I came down here to see the sunshine, and God had different ideas. So it seems like everywhere in the country I go, it's like it follows me around like that cloud and Little Abner over Joe Bafilsnik or whatever.
Well, I know you are a Colorado native as well and spent a lot of your life here. I'm looking out my window over my camera here, and it's snow flurries. So we are in similar environment today.
Yeah. I always like that, actually. I like when it's snowing. I don't like when it ends and it's just gray and it's on the ground and slush. I don't know, but it's pretty when it snows. It's purifying.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully there are people watching right now. They won't see it on the day we're recording it, but they're watching right now in sunshine and 70 degrees and enjoying their day.
So, that just gave me a notion that maybe would be interesting to share with folks today, which is, and so let's try this on and see how this works for you, Stace, to see if it's something we want to talk about. The purification of perspective. If we were to just take that thematically of what is perspective, why is it impure, and how do we purify it, and what's the benefit of doing so, might be some questions that might be interesting to people. And at first it may sound philosophical and all, but really, I believe our perspective is our mental model. It is our reality, and therefore determines our emotions and our quality of life. I think this could be a healthy discussion that might help people that this time of year may be experiencing seasonal affective disorder, which is common, sad, right? Light, all that. And frankly, just people in the mortgage industry going through tough times with perspectives, people that are feeling at odds with family or friends or whatever. Let's see if we can help people take a little ground with some tools and some ideas around why might it be a healthy responsibility that you have the power to actually execute to purify your perspective in life. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's perfect. I was sharing a couple of experiences with you when we spoke earlier today about just at the end of the year, I heard so many people talking about how they were so glad that 2022 was over, 2023, I guess, and into the new year. And I'm sitting there thinking, I get it, because that's a perspective. It was a week ago. So what also new that we're a week later, other than our perspective, the potential for our perspective? And I had a client that I was supposed to meet with today and called and canceled because in the mortgage business had a transaction that was going sideways and needed to readdress that. Was going to have to spend some time in a car to go to try to resolve that. And instead of complaining, his response was, I'm just glad I have this problem. And I praised him and said, way to frame an inconvenience for yourself and for me, because I don't care to just help, but way to frame that from a perspective of not only do I have the business, but I get to go help someone that needs the
That's
help.
Beautiful.
And so I think about that for just where we're at in our efforts to help people really learn how to master the discipline of their thinking. And
Yeah.
I think you've done a lot for me, Alan, the last 6 months about that, because it's so easy to let the emotions of something that's temporarily going on think that we have to think something has to have a permanent response to that. And oftentimes it really just needs to be what we've talked about before, stop and say, how interesting. I wonder why I felt that way, or I was prone to react that way. It really wasn't going to improve my life by doing that. How could I have maybe stopped myself and said, let me reframe this. Let me stay, I guess, clear on my long term vision tied to my personal life vision of what I want to be in the world and be to the world and experience in the world. What do you think of that?
I think that's right on target. I think it's beautiful. Why does, so if we start with the basics, what is perspective and why does it matter, Stacey?
Yeah. So I guess I would answer that. Perspective is my impression or belief of what reality is.
Nice.
That this is
Nice.
the way I'm seeing this situation, the world, myself in the world. And sometimes we do that because we don't trust the world or we don't trust life, or we feel like we'll have some loss or suffering if we think differently about it. And what I've discovered, you shared this with me in your lifetime too, after 6 decades, I've discovered that a lot of the time my feelings about that are wrong. And so my thinking actually increases the suffering or the potential for that instead of stopping and saying,
Yeah.
I don't have to have an emotional reaction to this without thinking through it and wondering what that perception has done to my current reality. How about you?
Beautiful.
How would you just
Well,
describe
what comes to mind as you're sharing that was this thought that perspective takes two forms, reactive or proactive.
it? Mhm.
And our level 3 ego self tends to have reactive perspectives based upon old scripts, old experiences, old fears, old anxieties, insecurities. And a reactive perspective, I believe, is typically grounded in our relationship with who we think we are inside that we don't necessarily want the world to know because it's our dirty laundry and it's that part of us we feel is sinful and imperfect and all that, as well as our experiences. Children that grow up in an abusive household tend to have a deep sense of scarring, and therefore they tend to have a really deep meme of reactive perspectives in life that's defensive and fear based and insecure out of their history. And that is sadly where I think most human beings co create suffering. Suffering is an experience of circumstance interpreted by perspective that results in experience. And so you can have Viktor Frankl in the death camps, who is in the death camps every day, he may be killed. And yet he took a proactive perspective of saying, they can't take away my freedom to choose how I'm going to look at things. And I'm going to choose to look forward and see a future beyond the death camps. He used to imagine in the death camps, the day will come where I get liberated from here. I'm going to live through it. And I'm going to be in front of a crowd full of people sharing wisdom that I learned while here. This, therefore, while hell is also heaven because it's giving me a gift of information that will make a difference in the lives of others. That's proactive perspective. And it comes from our level 4, our values and our soul. And that is the great opportunity of being a human being, is to remember that we have the option of proactive perspective and not merely reactive perspective. And therefore our emotions don't have to create our reality of depression, anxiety, worry, fear, etc. What are your thoughts, brother?
So, as you're describing Viktor Frankl in the concentration camps and having faith is really how that I perceive that. It might you hear this term, well, that puts it in perspective, right? We see someone who is suffering or has it worse than us. And that's typically the way we come to this conclusion that puts that in perspective. But the reality is that we've got a lot of folks that are probably watching in that, irrespective of their own hardship, whether it's, our friends in the mortgage industry that have gone through a massive downturn in production and seeing teammates struggle and teammates that had to be displaced and all that. If we can put that in perspective, it's not pleasant. And it wasn't easy, and it may still not be easy, but it has a purpose in the longer run. And if we'll let
Right.
ourselves understand that we can actually be so much more effective as leaders, as sales professionals in the industry, or just as human beings at home, if we can take that time and reframe it and say, okay, yes, it's been so difficult, but now I have a chance that I can deepen any relationship that I'm engaged with in this industry. I can take this time to go back to the skills lab, so to speak, and hone my skills at my craft, learn more about my products and structuring and all the things that when I come across a new situation with a customer that maybe nobody else knows how to solve, I'll know how to solve it. So maybe that's part of
What's an
break.
example in your life, Stacey? Because you've lived a big life, brother. You've lived a big life. You've touched a lot of lives. You've accomplished a lot. But like all of us, you've had your moments of trial. What's
Yeah.
an example in your life that was an invitation to suffering that you've had to work on and move beyond reactive perspective into proactive perspective to allow you not just to go on and function and not, go in the garage and turn the car on with the garage door closed, but to actually get through it and maybe even get to the side where you see it as having been a blessing rather than a curse. What's a situation like that in your
Yeah, well, I'm trying to think of which 50 to bring up. Um, but I guess one of the beauties about our relationship, Al, and what we're trying to do for people here is really be authentic and vulnerable and all those things. So if I think about my entire lifetime and the greatest hardship, suffering, if you will, etc., would be seeing my marriage fail after 33 years. And it's I'm four plus years out, and so those perspectives of what have I learned, what have I grown from, how can I be, I guess, an example to others in the world about, I guess, two things. Maybe one would be, how do you survive that on the other end and not have such self-deprecation and think you're a failure at life and you failed your family and you failed your former spouse? Why not go to the garage with the garden hose?
life?
And that is that's real for a lot of people, not just me. But I
Yeah.
guess on the other side of that is that I've learned that my perspective is a lot of the other little crap that I used to worry about doesn't mean jack. It means
Yeah.
nothing.
Yeah.
Those relationships. And I guess that so many lessons. I can sit there for the next 5 hours and talk about all the lessons and all the things that I failed at in the length of our time together that I could have been better at and maybe would have resulted in a different outcome for us. But uh, I can also go down such a dark path on that it wouldn't be healthy for me or any of our listeners and other things. I guess the second thing is I've learned that just because I had that situation doesn't disqualify me from helping others understand how to maybe not have that happen.
Yeah.
And so I'm
Yeah.
I'm anxious to spend the rest of my life helping people really understand how to live those authentic level 4 soul identity marriages, so that they don't have those kinds of outcomes. And again, even though that was dramatic in my life, Alan, still is, as you know, it's still temporal in the end. And
Yeah.
there's life beyond that where everything will be whole. My faith tells me we'll spend eternity in some form near one another in loving forgiveness and all those things. So
Yes.
you can ask me more questions about it, but that would be certainly the
Well, I
deepest.
think that's very heartfelt and beautifully put, and I think it paints some really excellent lessons for a general pathology that I think I've noticed over and over and over in 25,000 hours of coaching conversations with people, which is this. When we find ourselves in a moment of sorrow, guilt, shame, depression, anxiety, fear, any of the dark states, There's a couple things we can do. We can practice cognitive behavioral therapy as considered in a book called Feeling Good, The New Mood Therapy by Dr. David Burns, an excellent book on how to change the tape in your head to change your emotions. That's sort of an immediate Band-Aid of how to do it. But really, brother, I think what I've found in my life that I have to do, and I encourage my clients to, and it seems to help, is I had a quick sidebar. I had a holy man 50 years ago give me 3 truths to live by that I maybe talked about. But the third truth says this, and it was tough for me, but it's become in many ways the most valuable truth. He said, I want you to remember that everything in life and the universe is always and already perfect just as it is. And it's only the limitation of our perspective on it that ever has us experience it as suffering. And so as I've thought about that through the years, what I've somehow come to and realize is that what that dynamic is when in a dark state is to expand perspective until you move to neutrality. We start in a reactive perspective of pain. I got divorced. I'm a bad guy. Oh man, I wish I coulda, woulda, shoulda, and all that. We do that to ourselves. We stab ourselves over and over with guilt and shame. So we expand perspective and context on it. Like, well, a lot of people get divorced, and it doesn't mean they're all bad people. Maybe it doesn't mean I'm a bad person or she's a bad person. Maybe it just had its time and we created great children together. Maybe that was its purpose. But then it gets kind of neutral, but then you keep expanding until you get to the blessing of it. What seemed like a curse, if expanded far enough, becomes a blessing to it when looked at from the architecture of whatever your faith system is, of God, divinity, the source, the universe, all of that, because that now takes us to a place where we're looking at it all through the heart and the mind of an intelligent design where there are no accidents. And it all happens for a reason, and the reason is always good in the end. Well, what about babies with leukemia? What about the Jews in death camps? I promise, even those horrific things, when expanded large enough, well, we learned, sadly, with the sacrifice of 25 million lives in World War II, what have we learned? That evil does exist, and that excessive nationalism connected with racism becomes something that's an entire danger of the world, and more so as our technology develops. So in a way, there was a sacrifice of a big chunk of humanity that ends up giving overall humanity a chance to move forward with less likelihood of such potentially apocalyptic endings of it all. Or maybe this isn't our only life, or maybe our lives are bigger than we even are allowed to know at this level. And everything we go through is part of a schoolroom where we're learning what our options of response are to bring us closer to that divine source. And therefore, whatever we go through, while painful in the moment, like a kid dropping skin in their knees when they're 3 that cries and the world's over, that skin heals. And when they grow up, they learn to be a little more careful when they're balancing on the balance beam in the Olympics. So point being is, generally speaking, we move from reactive to proactive perspective with an expansion of perspective till we get to the context beyond neutral to gratitude. What are your thoughts, brother?
Yeah, and here we are framing a different perspective. And it feels to me like we begin to understand that while our lives are independent, they really aren't. And we're all part of a bigger part of this universe and world. And for me, it makes me in even more awe of God, as I believe God, that we matter.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think about all the things you described, but I'll go back to the situation with my marriage and so forth. Is that you go through this stage of complete utter shame and guilt and sadness and grieving, and then you move beyond that to where it's survival. I got to survive. I have to get past this and exist. And then you move past that, I think, to a point where there's sadness because of not so much yourself any longer, but those that you have had an impact on as a result of those decisions and the failures, if you will. And so whether it be your ex-spouse, your children, or your extended family that no longer feels the warmth of those relationships. But then you go past that and you have a perspective of, man, I've got more lessons through that than I could have spent a lifetime of having my life go perfect. And so now
Yeah,
my
our growth normally occurs in the experience of suffering. Maybe let's do this to give our listeners and viewers some actionable, positive steps they can take. What would be two or three, 1 to 3 positive perspectives that Brother Stacey would offer whoever is watching this that might set them up for a sense of power and purpose and passion for 2024, personally or professionally or both? What might be a few things you would offer them?
Yeah, so I think that there are a few. The first thing that I would start with is literally self-compassion and practicing self-compassion, realizing that you are important to this world. You're important to the immediate people around you. If you're
Mm,
in business
mm,
in a company, you're
mm,
important to them. And so some self-compassion about anything that you think didn't go well in 2023, or
mm,
maybe isn't going well to launch the year. You just self-compassion. And so that might come from the process of journaling. I journal every single day. And so
mm,
write
mm,
out what you feel like you need to address in the sense of how you're viewing yourself. So
mm,
journaling, prayer, I think having stopping and having taking inventory of your values in your character, in your integrity, in what you want to express to the world through those things. And so maybe jot those down again. What do I think are my main values? How do I express that in the way I live my life, both personally and professionally? How do I express
mm,
that to other people so that they understand my intent and my commitment to those values? Certainly, we believe in creating this thing called a personal life vision, where you are truly identifying what you want to see the world be like and what role you want to play in that world that you think would be amazing to have. And so
yeah.
I think there's some things like that. Certainly, you can create a list of all your disciplines. You can create the task you want to complete. You can put deadlines to them. And there are some tools. We talked in our last episode about the echo of empowerment, and we've got tools that it's a planning tool, it's a progress,
Yeah.
it's a project
Yeah.
tool. So we'd love to share that with you. But those are some of the things that come to mind for me. How about
I
you?
think it's beautiful. Well, I had one of my clients recently send me a YouTube video by a guy named Jocko. Now, have you
Mhm.
ever heard of Jocko?
I do.
Uh,
He's an ex.
he's apparently well known. I don't
Yeah,
know,
he's an
maybe
ex
ex Navy
former SEAL, I
SEAL.
think. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like I've heard his name. He's a motivational speaker, but he has a really great little YouTube video called "It's Good."
Mhm.
That's really just all about whatever somebody brings to you of describing how this is horrible. It's good,
Mhm.
and it's a quite potent little thing because I found myself thinking about after watching it that how often we're tempted to just take at face value, woe is me, because this or that happened. And normally, most fear and anxiety is a speculation out of what it's going to mean in the future. So we need to be leery of the projection out of what's happening at this moment and where it's going to lead. And that's a survival instinct, limbic brain built into us. So I think we need to. I think there's two things I'd put on the table to really consider. I think it's that to remember that what you said earlier, Stacey, your perception is your reality, and you have power to modify that perception and therefore your reality. And you need to have a sense of a North Star of purpose, so to speak, that you can instantly spot anywhere you are that's above it all that can remind you of the optimal options of perspective available to you. You and I have personalized visions. My personalized vision is a world where all people realize their fullest potential, a world of extraordinary relationships and extraordinary accomplishments, and a world where integrity and honorable actions are courageously pursued and commonly experienced. What's that mean? It means that whatever the hell comes up in my life, I have a lot of tools of perspective available to me to say, well, let's see, my son is hurting. I'm committed to everyone realizing their fullest potential. He can't do that if he's unhappy or suicidal or whatever. I've got to do whatever I can do to have him have a chance at working forward to full optimization. So I think to have a sense of purpose and a sense of the options of our perspective is a helpful beginning point. And then in the moment, here's how we can turn dark perspectives and dark thoughts into growth. I think the way we do that, and what I do anyway, and what I recommend people consider doing is consider the 8 noble virtues. Now, we've talked about it in previous podcasts, but love, compassion, faith, humility, wisdom, peace, truth, gratitude. Consider those 8. Write them down. Now, when you're in a situation that feels dark, and dark as measured by I'm anxious, I'm afraid, I'm depressed, I'm worried, whatever. Whenever you're in a state, you recognize, first thing to do when you're in a state like that is to realize I'm in a dark state and I don't want to stay here. So how do I change it? Yeah, but our minds will start to add evidence as to why you should be in a dark state. You should make it darker. Because here's all the reasons. Stacey, you got divorced. What's that say about you as a character and our tape, our self-destructive, that's where the self-compassion comes in. Here's what we do as a tool. Think of the 8 virtues and ask yourself, which of them is closest to being the opposite of what I'm going through, how I'm seeing it right now? Oh, I'm worried. What would faith be thinking right now? Ask yourself that question and follow that line of thinking. Well, faith would be thinking, maybe this is a good thing, like Jocko says, because it's showing me what I have to work on to get past, to grow bigger, so that I never have to be afraid of this again. If you do that, if you ask yourself which of the 8 virtues or combination of the 8 virtues may be the opposite of whatever dark state you recognize you're in, it becomes an instant. Well, first thing you're going to experience is the fact that, wow, reality is much more malleable than we think it is. It's much more fluid. It's much more changeable. And I have the power to change it by how I'm looking at things. If Viktor Frankl can do it in the death camps, you and I and everybody watching this can do it in day to day. Oh, I'm not doing enough loans. My wife's unhappy with me. My kid's on drugs, whatever. We can take those on, not being in the death camp. So those would be probably some of the things I'd put on the table as sort of some tools for people to consider. What do you think, brother?
I think it's awesome. I think there are some great points that we've given today for people to think of past 2023 into 2024 and beyond, and practical steps that they can implement in their life and their business to make 2024 different than 2023. So it's not just at the end of the year a repeat of the previous year. Now we're kind of at the end of our time commitments, but what I'm excited about in the future, I've talked about this, probably the best way that we can help people learn from what we're involved with our work is to give case studies and talk about some things we're learning from our own clients and our own client experiences about how do we live this life of mastery, so to speak, because I doubt there's anybody watching that wouldn't like to be masterful in every area of their life, body, mind, spirit, and soul, right? And so we'll continue to do that. But I appreciate all the things we covered today and look forward to the next time we're together.
Before we close, I have one more tool to offer people, and that is maybe something I should have led with. Find a masterful coach like Stacey Harding with a good heart, with a good mind, with a depth of experience, and with a vibe when you speak with them of synchronicity, where you trust they can be let behind the curtain of your secret world you live alone with. Find that coach, and I'll tell you, they're pretty rare. There's a lot of coaches that'll tell you what to do, and that. Find that special, masterful coach that can help you grow your relationship with you, because I think that is the shortcut to finding your own sense of happiness and fulfillment in life. And Stacey would be a good choice, a great choice.
Well, I know Al shares this. We want you to find the right coach for you. If we happen to be that, if you can't get on his schedule, come see me, because I try to get on his first. We love
Brother,
that you guys
thank
are
you.
watching us, and we're so grateful to be able to help serve and provide value to you this way.
Be blessed, my friends,
All
and
right.
have
Everybody have a
positive
good one.
perspectives. All right. Thank you.
Be well.
Good.